Ryan's office revenge. The light switch made the same soft click it had made 22 years ago when I first stepped into that office. Back then it was a cramped corner with flickering fluorescents, a metal desk from the 80s, and a whiteboard that still had someone else's project timelines scribbled on it. Now it was a glass-walled corner office with ergonomic everything and a nameplate that read Senior Infrastructure Architect for about 10 more seconds. I'm Edward Harrison, 58 years old, and I just got fired from the company I helped build from nothing. I stood there, hand still on the switch, watching those overhead lights blink off for the last time. Behind me, my coffee mug sat cold on the desk, the one that said Semper Fi in fading red letters. A gift from my late wife, Sarah, before the cancer took her 5 years back. The photo of me and the original founders still sat crooked on the bookshelf where the cleaning crew knocked it askew last month. I never bothered fixing it. Maybe some part of me knew this day was coming. The hallway buzzed with that awkward hum of people pretending not to notice. When you've been somewhere as long as I have, your name becomes the kind of whisper that young managers squint at on org charts and interns try to Google when they need something fixed at 2 a.m. 22 years of loyalty, and I disappear with one sentence from some kid who thinks experience is a dirty word. "The exit's behind you, Ed," Justin Palmer had said, grinning like he'd just solved climate change. "But we'll get to him in a minute." It's a strange thing, leaving a job you practically raised from infancy. When I joined Red Wolf Defense Systems back in 2001, fresh out of the Marines and looking for something that mattered, the whole operation ran on 2 desktop computers and pure determination. The server room was literally a converted bathroom, with the toilet still in it. I wrote the first line of what would become our $85 million cybersecurity platform on a borrowed laptop while someone's dog kept walking across my keyboard. See, I'd done my 20 in the Corps. 2 tours in the Gulf, 1 in Afghanistan, watching kids barely old enough to vote try to keep democracy alive in places that had forgotten what it looked like. When I got out in 2000, the tech boom was just hitting its stride, and every defense contractor in Northern Virginia was desperate for guys who understood both computers and combat. Sarah was finishing her nursing degree at VCU then. We'd met at a Veterans Day barbecue where she told me I looked too serious for someone eating a hot dog. She was right, as usual. The military had taught me to see threats everywhere, to plan for failure, to document everything, because your life might depend on remembering exactly what you did 6 months ago. Those habits saved my career more times than I could count. While other developers built fast and broke things, I built careful and kept records. While they celebrated shipping version 1.0, I was already planning version 3.0 and thinking about what would happen if the whole thing fell apart. I didn't just build the system at Red Wolf. I was the system. Every authentication protocol, every security layer, every line of code that kept government data safe. I built it like it was defending my own family. While other departments threw happy hours and team-building retreats, I stayed behind patching vulnerabilities and walking new CTOs through systems they'd never understand. The early days were beautiful in their chaos. 4 of us working 16-hour days, living on pizza, and the kind of caffeine-fueled determination that only comes when you're building something that matters. Richard Stone, the founder, was a former NSA analyst who understood that cybersecurity wasn't about fancy interfaces or marketing buzzwords. It was about keeping bad people out of places they didn't belong. Sarah used to bring me dinner when I worked late, usually around 9 p.m. when she got off her shift at the hospital. She'd sit in my car in the parking lot, and we'd eat Chinese takeout while I explained whatever fire I was putting out that day. She never complained about the hours, never asked when I'd be home. She understood that we were building something bigger than ourselves. "You know what I love about you?" she told me one night in 2003, after I'd spent 3 straight days debugging an authentication failure that could have compromised a Defense Department contract. "You don't just fix problems, you make sure they can't happen again." That was Sarah. She saw the best in everything, even when I couldn't see it myself. 3 CEOs came and went over the years. Some decent, some dumber than a box of rocks, but none of them ever questioned my place. I wasn't flashy. Wasn't the type to give PowerPoint presentations about digital transformation, but when our defense contracts needed security audits, or when some 3-letter agency called at midnight because their access was down, guess who they wanted? The old Marine who knew where all the digital bodies were buried. Me. I saw mergers, IPO talks, congressional hearings, and enough corporate drama to fill a soap opera. Through it all, quietly and methodically, I kept the lights on. I kept America's data safe while others played dress-up in corner offices and talked about leveraging synergies. Then Justin Palmer showed up, and everything changed. Justin Palmer was the kind of guy who uses utilize instead of use and thinks blockchain is the answer to everything. Private equity had brought him in to modernize our human capital, which really meant fire anyone over 40 who wasn't cheap enough. To him, I was legacy code in human form, a relic from the dial-up era who didn't understand that the future belonged to digital natives. The first time I met him was at a company-wide meeting in August. He strutted in wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's rent, carrying a tablet and talking loud enough for everyone to hear his phone conversation about disrupting the paradigm. Sarah would have laughed at that. She always said you could tell everything you needed to know about a person by how they treated the janitor and how many buzzwords they used in normal conversation. "Team," he announced. Like we were his personal army, we're entering a new era. The old ways of doing business are dead. We need to think differently, move faster, embrace innovation. I sat in the back, watching him click through slides full of pie charts and growth projections. He talked about right-sizing the workforce and optimizing legacy resources. Corporate speak for firing the people who actually knew how things worked. After the meeting, he made his rounds, shaking hands and making promises he'd never keep. When he got to me, he looked at my name tag, and his smile got a little tighter. "Edward, right? I've heard great things. 22 years with the company. That's impressive." The way he said impressive made it sound like a medical condition. "Just Ed," I said. "And yeah, I've been here since we had more computers than employees." He laughed, like that was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. "Well, Ed, I'm looking forward to picking your brain about the legacy systems, getting your perspective on how we can modernize our approach." Legacy systems. There it was, the polite way of saying old garbage that needs to be thrown out. Over the next few months, Justin implemented his vision of progress. He hired a bunch of 25-year-olds straight out of coding boot camps and gave them titles like Innovation Specialist and Digital Transformation Coordinator. Kids who thought Stack Overflow was research and couldn't debug their way out of a paper bag. He moved me out of my corner office and into a smaller space near the break room, where I could hear every conversation about weekend plans and dating drama. Said it would help with cross-pollination of ideas. Really, it was just making room for his golf simulator. The breaking point came when one of his digital natives accidentally pushed untested code to production and crashed our authentication servers for 6 hours. Government agencies couldn't access their security dashboards. Pentagon officials were calling the founder directly, asking why their classified briefings looked like a Windows 95 screensaver. I fixed it in 20 minutes once they finally called me. Just reverted to the previous stable build and patched the vulnerability they'd introduced. But Justin took credit for the quick recovery in his report to the board. "Crisis management is about decisive leadership," he told them. We identified the issue, mobilized resources, and restored full functionality with minimal impact. He didn't mention that his decisive leadership consisted of panicking in the server room while I actually fixed the problem. That's when I knew my time was up. When incompetence gets rewarded and experience gets marginalized, you're working for the wrong people. Sarah always said I was too loyal for my own good, and she was right. But loyalty is supposed to be a two-way street. The final insult came during a security review meeting in October. We were discussing updates to our defense contracts, and Justin kept interrupting with questions that proved he had no idea how our systems actually worked. "Why can't we just migrate everything to the cloud?" he asked. "It would be more efficient." Because, I explained for the third time, government security protocols require on-premise infrastructure with specific encryption standards that cloud providers can't guarantee. He waved his hand like I was making excuses. "There's always a workaround. We just need to think outside the box." That's when I asked him, just to see what would happen, what zero-trust architecture meant. He stared at me for 5 seconds, then said, "I don't get into the technical weeds. That's what I have subject matter experts for." Subject matter experts, like I was some contractor he'd hired for the afternoon. After that meeting, I went home to the house Sarah and I had bought when we thought we'd grow old there together. Sat in my kitchen, looking at the empty chair where she used to drink her morning coffee and read me funny stories from the local newspaper. The cancer had taken her so fast I barely had time to process it. Work had been my way of coping, of keeping busy enough that I didn't have to think about coming home to an empty house every night. But now work felt empty too. Everything I'd built, everything I'd protected, was being handed over to people who saw it as nothing more than lines on a spreadsheet. That's when I remembered the red leather folder in my filing cabinet, the one I'd kept out of habit, the way Marines keep their service records long after they get out. Documentation from the early days, when we were too busy building to worry about paperwork. I pulled it out that night and read through the original IP agreements we'd signed back in 2001. Agreements that had never been updated, never been transferred, never been properly executed because there was always something more urgent to handle. Agreements that still listed Red Wolf Systems LLC as the owner of our entire code base. Red Wolf Systems, the shell company I'd created to handle the IP while we got the main business incorporated. The company I'd forgotten about until that moment. The company that, according to every legal document we'd signed, still owned the $85 million platform that Justin Palmer thought he could just give away to his digital natives. I spent the rest of that night reading every email, every contract amendment, every casual "we'll get to it later" response from management when I'd tried to clean up the paperwork over the years. By morning, I had a complete picture of just how badly they'd screwed themselves. And I was ready for Justin Palmer's next move. The call came on a Tuesday morning in November, 3 weeks after I'd rediscovered the Red Wolf Systems documentation. Justin's assistant, Patricia Stone, sent me a calendar invite at 9:15 a.m. Quick sync with executive team, 10 o'clock a.m. Quick sync. Corporate speak for your execution is scheduled. I knew what was coming the moment I saw the meeting request. 22 years in the same building teaches you to read the signs. The way conversations stopped when I walked into a room. The way Patricia avoided eye contact when she handed me the invite. The way Justin had been making rounds with his tablet, probably building his case for why I was dead weight. I didn't rush to get ready. Took my time finishing my coffee, the good stuff I kept in my desk drawer, not the swill they served in the break room. Put on my best tie, the navy blue one Sarah had bought me for my promotion to senior architect. If they were going to fire me, they'd have to look at a man who dressed like he belonged there. The walk to Justin's office felt like my last patrol in Afghanistan. Same knot in my stomach. Same awareness that everything was about to change. The difference was, this time I knew exactly what was waiting for me. Justin sat behind his glass desk like a judge pronouncing sentence. The HR team flanked him. Linda Carter and Christopher Blake, both young enough to be my kids, and nervous enough to make me wonder if this was their first execution too. They had their laptops open, probably following some script about performance management and organizational restructuring. "Ed," Justin said, standing up and extending his hand like we were meeting for the first time. I didn't take it. 22 years, I said flatly, just so everyone in the room had to feel the weight of those numbers. His smile faltered for half a second. Right. 22 incredible years. But we're entering a new phase. Digital transformation. Cloud-first infrastructure. And unfortunately, that means restructuring some legacy positions to make room for new talent. Fresh perspectives. You understand? I watched his mouth move while my brain cataloged every word. Legacy positions. Fresh perspectives. The kind of buzzword salad that MBA programs teach you to use when you're firing someone who knows more than you ever will. Behind him on the wall was a framed poster of our platform's security dashboard, version 1.0. The one I'd built in my garage on weekends, while Sarah brought me coffee and complained about the blue glow keeping her awake. The one they now used in sales presentations to Pentagon officials, calling it revolutionary defense architecture. Justin had no idea he was firing the architect of his revolution. "We'll offer you a generous severance package," Christopher jumped in, reading from his script. 3 months full salary, health benefits continuation, outplacement services. Very comprehensive. "Understood," I said, and stood up. No arguments. No pleading, no asking who they thought could maintain systems that predated their college internships. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in that room. They'd expected a fight. Maybe some desperate negotiation about staying on as a consultant or begging for 6 more months to train my replacement. What they got was marine discipline, so calm it made them uncomfortable. "Ed," Justin said slowly, tilting his head like a confused dog. "Is there anything else you'd like to discuss?" I thought about it for exactly 1 heartbeat. Thought about mentioning Clause 7.3 from the original IP agreement. Thought about explaining how their modernization was about to cost them more than my entire salary for the next decade. Instead, I said, "Nope," and headed for the door. The walk back to my office was a funeral march where I was the only mourner. People glanced up from their monitors, then quickly away, like looking at me might get them fired too. I passed the break room where someone was heating up leftover fish. Of course they were. In my office, I moved with purpose. Packed my personal laptop first, the one I'd bought myself, the one no corporate IT department could touch. Grabbed the red leather folder from my filing cabinet, the one that had been gathering dust behind my service records and anniversary photos. Left everything else. Let the digital natives inherit my technical manuals and industry awards. Let Justin keep the plaques on the wall from grateful government agencies who had no idea what was coming. The red folder felt heavier than it should have as I carried it down 5 flights of stairs. I didn't trust elevators that day. Didn't want to share a small space with anyone who might try to make conversation about my transition or ask if I was okay. Outside, the November wind cut through my jacket like it was paper. I got in my truck, the same Ford F-150 I'd been driving for 8 years, paid off and reliable as sunrise, and sat there for exactly 30 seconds, long enough to let reality sink in. Then, I drove to Murphy's Diner, the place where Sarah and I used to go when the cancer treatments made her too sick to cook at home. I ordered black coffee and sat in our old booth, the one with the cracked vinyl that nobody ever bothered to fix. The waitress, Helen, recognized me but didn't ask why I wasn't at work on a Tuesday morning. She'd seen enough men my age having coffee at strange hours to know better than to pry. From my bag, I pulled out the red leather folder and set it on the table like I was placing evidence at a crime scene. 22 years of documentation, all of it organized with the methodical precision the Corps had beaten into me. The first tab contained the original IP agreement, signed in 2001, when Red Wolf Defense Systems was 4 people working out of a converted warehouse. Back then, I was still collecting disability payments and couldn't take a regular salary. So instead, we'd put everything in writing: ownership of source code, security protocols, and compiled executables would remain with Edward Harrison via Red Wolf Systems LLC until we had enough funding to execute a proper transfer. They'd called it a placeholder, a temporary arrangement until we got legitimate. 22 years later, that placeholder was about to become the most expensive oversight in corporate history. I pulled out my personal phone and dialed Jeffrey Walsh, the lawyer who'd handled Sarah's estate and knew how to keep his mouth shut. He picked up on the second ring. "Ed? What's going on? Remember that consulting opportunity we talked about last year? The one where I might have more leverage than a Swiss bank? You still own the platform, don't you? Every line of code, every security protocol, all of it flows through Red Wolf Systems LLC, and they never bothered to transfer ownership." Jeffrey's whistle was low and appreciative. "And you just got terminated. With cause, according to them. Failure to adapt to modern practices. This is going to be very expensive for them. How soon can you get to my office?" While I was scheduling my appointment with Financial Justice, Justin Palmer's digital empire was beginning its spectacular collapse. At 10:45 a.m., the East Coast Defense Portal locked out during a routine security audit, freezing access for 12 Pentagon officials trying to review quarterly compliance reports. 30 minutes later, the Navy's contractor management system started throwing authentication errors. By 11:20, a congressional aide from the Armed Services Committee was leaving increasingly angry voicemails about why the classified briefing dashboard looked like it belonged in a museum. See, those core modules I'd built over the years weren't just software. They were digital fortresses, wrapped in custom authentication protocols that only I knew how to maintain. When HR killed my company Access, they triggered a cascade failure in systems they didn't even know existed. Nicole Rodriguez, one of the few competent people left in IT, started tracing the authentication failures around noon. Her diagnostic logs told a story that made grown programmers weep. Core systems reporting primary, license holder not verified and unauthorized access attempt logged. Justin stormed into the server room like a man trying to intimidate a machine. Security cameras later captured him pointing at server racks and shouting, "Just restart everything!" "Sir," Nicole said, looking like someone had asked her to defuse a nuclear weapon, "these are production defense systems. We can't just reboot them. Clear the cache. Reset whatever's blocking access. The authentication servers aren't cached, sir. They're hard-coded to verify licensing through Red Wolf Systems." That's when the real panic started, because Red Wolf Systems wasn't some vendor they could call. It was me, sitting in a diner booth, watching their $85 million platform turn into the world's most expensive paperweight. By 1 p.m., I was in Jeffrey's downtown office, signing documents that would make Justin's MBA head spin. The licensing agreement was beautiful in its simplicity. 3-year exclusive contract, $85 million upfront licensing fee, 15% royalty on new installations, and full architectural oversight retained by yours truly. My personal favorite clause, immediate termination of Justin Palmer from all operational authority. "They'll fight the termination requirement," Jeffrey warned. "They'll pay it," I said, signing the cover letter. "They don't have a choice." By 2:30 p.m., their first government client had escalated to urgent priority. A 3-star general wanted to know why his cybersecurity briefing looked like a Windows 95 screensaver. By 3 p.m., their biggest defense contract was frozen pending access clarification. By 4 p.m., founder Richard Stone was flying back from whatever expensive vacation he'd been enjoying, probably wondering how his $85 million company had become legally homeless in the span of one afternoon. The emergency board meeting convened at 5 p.m. sharp. Stone read my licensing proposal aloud to a room full of people who suddenly understood the difference between owning software and having permission to use software. 3-year exclusive license. $85 million upfront fee. Immediate removal of Justin Palmer from operational authority. The silence that followed was the sound of Justin's career flattering like a punctured tire. "Why?" Stone asked, staring directly at Justin. "Is our entire defense portfolio owned by someone we fired this morning?" "It was supposed to be temporary," Justin stammered. "Legacy paperwork. We were going to modernize the agreements." "When? After we lost our government contracts? After the Pentagon blacklisted us as a security risk?" By 6 p.m., I was back in my old office, turning on the same lights I'd turned off 8 hours earlier. Justin's personal effects were already gone. Security had walked him out while I was signing the new contract. My nameplate was back on the door. Edward Harrison, Senior Security Architect. But this time, they'd added a new line. Principal, Red Wolf Systems, LLC. I sat down in my chair, the one I'd bought myself 15 years ago when my back couldn't handle the standard-issue furniture anymore, and began drafting the security protocols that would govern the next 3 years of their existence. Every update, every modification, every line of code would flow through me now. They hadn't just rehired me, they'd made me indispensable by choice instead of by accident. I thought about Sarah, about how she used to say I was too loyal for my own good. One day, she'd told me during her last week in the hospital, "You'll learn that respect is something you take, not something you wait to be given." She'd been right, as always. I'd spent 22 years earning respect that could be revoked with a meeting invite. Now I had something better. Legal ownership of the foundation they'd built their empire on. Justin had called me legacy code, obsolete infrastructure, something to be replaced and discarded. But legacy isn't about age. It's about permanence. You can upgrade the interface, add modern features, integrate the latest trends. But if you try to replace the foundation without understanding how it works, the whole structure collapses. They learned that lesson at a cost of $85 million. And every time they flip a switch in that building, every time they win a government contract, every time they brag to investors about their revolutionary security architecture, they'll remember one simple truth. You don't fire the person who holds the keys to your kingdom. You find a way to make sure they never want to leave. They learned the most expensive lesson in corporate history. You don't fire the architect while you're still living in the building he designed.